The girl crawled on her knees toward the door. Her hands were slippery with blood and her leg hurt more than she ever thought possible, but she knew she had to move. Movement was the only way she was going to survive. If she could just get to the front door, she didn't think he would follow her. She didn't think he'd want to be seen outside. Every muscle in her body ached, and she could smell the copper scent of blood everywhere. Oh, the blood, and she distantly wondered how much of it was hers, and how much belonged to her mother, whom she'd found amongst sticky red bedsheets on her bedroom floor. She'd pushed him down the stairs as hard as she could and had bought herself time, but would it be enough? She thought it might. She thought that the fall had hurt him badly enough for her to get to the door. It could have even killed him, but she didn't allow herself to hope for that. Monsters never die. She heard him stir in the basement below her, and her heart beat even faster until it felt like it would jump out of her chest and onto the floor. She pulled herself against the carpet even quicker, and pain in her leg doubled, but she persisted. The pain reminded her she was still alive and reminded her that she needed to still be alive. The door was only a yard away now, maybe less, when she heard the heavy boots against the wooden stairs. He was coming. She cried out in pain and fear and lunged forward, picking herself up off the ground with her good leg and toppling toward the door like a marionette doll with a broken string. She unlocked the door and her fingers slipped against the doorknob, too sticky and wet with blood, until she gained purchase. The knob twisted and the boots behind her drew nearer, and she pulled the door, and a sudden pain in her scalp pulled her back. He had her by the hair. She screamed and tried to fight, but the blade came too quickly against the veins of her neck and sawed through them with sickening ease. She felt the warmth of her own blood spill across her chest like a bib, and the man let go of her hair. As the world faded and her vision blurred, the last thing she would ever feel was the feeling of the man's sour lips against hers, and the breath being sucked from her lungs. The Osborne house was situated directly in the middle of Cottonwood Circle. It looked flat and wide between the two multi-level homes that stood on either side, a valley between two mountains. Like the rest of the houses in that neighborhood, it was covered in cream-colored stucco that made the house seem clean but incredibly rough to the touch. An elegant stone pathway made of lava rock bisected the well-tended Kentucky bluegrass, connecting the front porch with the sidewalk, and on either side of the cement steps, two large rose bushes stood guard. Abraham Lincoln and Queen Elizabeth had watched during their 7 years as visitors and homeowners crossed through the threshold of the house on Cottonwood Circle. Edgar regarded these bushes with an intense fascination, standing at the bottom of the porch taking in every feature of the house and the yard he possibly could. If Abraham Lincoln could talk, what stories would he tell? What secrets would Queen Elizabeth divulge from deep within her soft pink petals? Edgar bent low toward her and inhaled deeply. The flowers had not yet bloomed, but their sweet scent still faintly hovered over them. He turned to his right and plucked a large, sleeping bud from Lincoln. Then, peeling the leaves back, he revealed the deep red flower that Abraham preferred to keep to himself while the sun was away. Edgar rolled one of the petals between his thumb and forefinger, enjoying the softness and temporarily staining his fingers red. He stuck his tongue out and placed the petal in the middle, and then returned his tongue to his mouth and rolled the petal around. It was outstandingly bitter, but had sweet, floral notes that were quite pleasant. To anyone else, the flavor would be revolting, but to Edgar, the flower was the perfect appetizer with which to begin his vacation. He popped the rest of the rosebud into his mouth as if it was a piece of candy, and he enjoyed it as such. Swallowing, he pulled his sleeve up to reveal a silver-faced wristwatch on his left wrist. It told him the time was 5:35. He had 4 minutes before sunrise. Edgar stood and lifted himself up the cement steps and sat on the porch swing that was placed beneath the veranda to his right, then rocked back and forth gently. The house faced east, which meant that Edgar had a front row seat to a Rocky Mountain sunrise that the residents of Bozeman, Montana experienced every day. He'd never witnessed any member of the Osborne family use the swing for anything other than a temporary shelf when trying to unlock the front door with an armful of groceries. The Osborne family had the type of view from their front yard that poets write about, and they took it for granted. Edgar's philosophy was that all life is, all it was ever meant to be, is a series of experiences and sensations. To reject these moments, like the Osbornes and so many others before them often did, was an unthankful disregard for what they had, and that disgusted him to the core. He was going to enjoy this sunrise like the Osborne family never had, and allow the experience to wash over him like a rising tide. A lifetime passed in the minutes leading up to the sunrise. Glancing through the curtain of time, he felt like Abraham Lincoln watching first dates, prom dresses, spousal arguments, bitter farewells, and sweet reunions all occur simultaneously on the porch. As the sun peeked around the mountains in the distance, it shot rays of light like fiery arrows across the valley. One of those rays fell upon Queen Elizabeth. The morning dew that clung to her leaves glistened like starlight. She was an entire galaxy contained within a single rosebush. Soon, Abraham too would receive the light, and the two would stand tall against the world sentinels of the Osborne household once more. Edgar watched the sunrise for a few precious minutes until he knew he needed to move. Mr. Jave next door would be kissing his wife any moment now. Then he'd be climbing into his silver Escalade and off to work. Edgar knew he couldn't be in the front yard at that time. It was risky sitting out for this long anyway, but he felt he owed a moment to the porch swing and the unappreciated view. Standing from his seat, Edgar nodded respectfully to the rose bushes like a gentleman tipping his hat to a lady, then walked around to the south side of the house. The white fence that surrounded the backyard was made of 8-foot-tall plastic slats that had been painted to impersonate white wood. The metal latch in the center was held together by a large, silver combination lock with the Permalock logo stamped on the back. Permalock was a respectable enough company with respectable enough locks. They weren't impossible to crack, but Edgar wasn't fond of any inconvenience that cracking them offered, so he preferred to avoid them if he could. Fortunately, Edgar had broken the code 2 weeks ago, in less than a few minutes. The lock clicked after he dialed in the 3 numbers Hannah Osborne's birthday, and Edgar shook his head and thought the same thing he had when he first cracked it. The Osbornes were just like sheep. They followed the herd in everything they did. Even if they didn't know it, it was ingrained into their genes. It wasn't necessarily a bad trait, as there is safety to be found in numbers, as thousands of years of evolution has proved, but it wasn't a particularly good trait either, as sheep were often simple-minded and failed to see the big picture. Edgar swung the gate open and slipped through. It was impossible to lock the gate from the backyard, so Edgar simply left it on the latch and closed the gate. Provided a strong breeze didn't catch it, the gate should stay closed for the next few hours. The backyard held little interest for Edgar. It seemed bland and void of any details that would further add dimension to the lives of the Osbornes. A large glass patio set was set up beneath a white pergola by the back door, which was a glass sliding door that allowed the kitchen to look into the yard and open up the atmosphere in the event a backyard barbecue or some other sort of party was held. Edgar wasn't sure how often such an event occurred. Initially, the Osborne family would host a multitude of backyard barbecues, as suggested by the large dual propane grill stationed against the house and the red brick fire pit across from the patio. But the weeks he spent studying the family gave him the impression that the patio set and grill were more obligatory possessions than useful ones, not unlike the porch swing. They all seemed withdrawn from the neighborhood, and neither Eric nor Hannah seemed to have any friends at work, aside from Eric's secretary, whom Edgar doubted would ever be invited over. While it was true that Kimberly Osborne, Kimmy to her friends, was quite popular at school, Edgar hadn't seen her bring anyone home except for the boy that snuck into her bedroom on Thursday nights. and Jason Osborne was too young to even want to throw such a party. Unless the space was used by Christopher Osborne, who had been deployed to active duty a year earlier, Edgar didn't believe the space was ever used. This led him to the conclusion that the Osbornes were, again, wasteful, and the reason for their grill's state of repair and cleanliness was simple disuse. Crossing the patio and fire pit, Edgar approached the storage and tool shed. This door was protected by an identical combination lock with a foolishly identical combination. He mildly wondered if they came in a 3-pack at Walmart as he dialed the digits into the lock and gained entrance to the shed. Once more he left the lock on the latch and pulled the door closed behind him. The shed was dark, but Edgar didn't need much to see. He'd spent years training his eyes to operate efficiently in the dark, and he could make out faint shapes in the blackness, which was just enough to move around without accidentally knocking into anything. He moved to the back and lay down flat upon the cool cement floor. Amidst the sense of dust, dirt, gasoline, and lawn clippings, he set his internal alarm clock for 2 hours and closed his eyes. When he awoke, he could hear the sounds of car doors slamming and the garage door rising. Eric had undoubtedly left already, and Hannah would be taking Kimmy and Jason to school on her way to work. Edgar stood and stretched, listening to the sound of Hannah's Ford escape back out of the garage. The garage door hummed closed as he exited the shed and clicked the lock back into the latch, and Hannah and the kids drove out of the circle. Leaving the backyard and subsequently locking the gate, Edgar could feel the first small rush of adrenaline since he'd arrived. He had not only the whole house to himself for the day, but the whole circle. The other 4 houses in the cul-de-sac were all inhabited by working or school families who had all left for the day, so he need not worry about exposure in the slightest. So it was with a calm, contented smile that Edgar walked up the front porch steps once more and opened the front door. The Osborne family never locked their door. Instead, they relied heavily on their home security system. These systems had caused a great deal of frustration in the past. Some even required his vacation off, but that would not be remotely necessary this time. From the kitchen, a robotic woman's voice announced that the front door was open, then a high-pitched chirping sound began. Closing the door behind him, Edgar sauntered down the hallway toward the kitchen. If someone were watching, they'd think Edgar had done this hundreds of times. In his mind, he had. To the right, above the granite-topped counter across from the sliding glass door, a plastic, white security box displayed a countdown timer in black numbers illuminated by a green backing. It had started counting down from 30, and Edgar saw that his time was halfway up. He keyed the 6-digit code he'd watched Hannah use from the backyard, and the chirping stopped. The robotic woman's voice announced that the system was disarmed. He punched the code again to arm the system he had no intention to leave, so he could leave it on in case someone surprised him and came home early. Behind him, the refrigerator hummed quietly. Edgar turned and crossed the white tile to open it. A few covered plastic containers were stacked on the middle shelf amidst takeout containers, beer, soda, and a small collection of vegetables. He selected the top container and pulled the lid off. The contents were of the macaroni salad he'd seen them eat the night before. He plunged his fingers into the cold pasta and wriggled them around. It reminded him of the old Halloween games in school when he was growing up. The children would wear a blindfold, then shriek in disgusted delight as they felt around buckets of eyeballs and intestines. When they took the blindfolds off, they'd all see buckets of peeled grapes and cooked spaghetti. As a kid, the game intrigued Edgar, but as an adult, having felt the difference now, the magic was gone to him. Pasta only ever felt like pasta. Edgar scooped a few noodles from the container and put them into his mouth. It wasn't his favorite pasta salad, but he'd had worse. He ate a few more bites before licking his fingers clean and returning the container to its place in the fridge, then rummaged through the food a little bit more until he finally extracted 2 strings of cheese, a snack-packed tapioca pudding cup, and a bowl of spaghetti. He placed them on the counter, satisfied with his findings. He would take them to his room as soon as he was finished giving himself grand tour. There were two parts of the house that Edgar was looking forward to. He crossed through the kitchen and dining room and walked into the living room. Couches lined the walls on one side, a recliner on the other, and a large television was mounted on the wall opposite. Bookshelves were stationed on either side of the television filled with video games and movies, and Edgar wondered if he'd find a genuine book anywhere throughout the house. The rest of the floor was clean, but what interested Edgar the most was above him. He lifted his gaze toward the fan in the center of the ceiling. He could tell it was obviously a newer model, but it pleased him that the spirit of the house had been kept intact. That room had been born with a ceiling fan. It had been there, on the original fan, that the architect of the house tied the rope that ended his life. It pleased Edgar to know that these walls had already seen so much life pass before them. He knew that most of a person's life was lived within his last moments, and although he didn't believe in spirits or phantoms, there certainly was a ghost that lived in the walls. There always was. It was buried deep within the walls, like an echo reverberating off the walls of a cave after the screaming has long since stopped. It was a beautiful power that Edgar could feel within his chest. Edgar wondered if the Osborne family knew about the architect of their home. He doubted it. The architect had left this world decades ago, but that didn't matter much. They would leave their own echoes inside the walls eventually. Pulling his gaze from the fan, Edgar continued his tour of the house. From the center of the living room, he could see the whole way down the hallway at the other end of the house. He stepped into the hallway and turned toward the kitchen. Before the end of the hall, there were two doors directly across from each other. The one on the right was too small to be anything other a closet, but the door on the left contained the bathroom. Because it had no window, he'd never seen this bathroom, but this was the only place in the house that it could be. He approached the door and entered the room. The hardwood flooring that covered the hallway abruptly stopped and became a yellow floral linoleum that looked like it had stepped out of the early 80s. The fixtures were all gold, and the bathroom was lightly decorated with soft pastel colors. Between the sink and shower was the toilet, which Edgar used while thumbing through the Sports Illustrated he found in a basket on his right. When he was finished, he washed his hands with a soap that smelled like eucalyptus and honey, then dried them. The act was so normal and comfortable that it almost gave Edgar goosebumps as he dried his hands. He felt like no more of a guest that Eric Osborne would, and that pleased him. This vacation was off to a great start. He already felt like a member of the family. The hardwood flooring that covered the hallway abruptly stopped and became a yellow floral linoleum that looked like it had stepped out of the early 80s. The fixtures were all gold, and the bathroom was lightly decorated with soft pastel colors. Between the sink and shower was the toilet, which Edgar used while thumbing through the Sports Illustrated he found in a basket on his right. When he was finished, he washed his hands with the soap that smelled like eucalyptus and honey, then dried them. The act was so normal and comfortable that it almost gave Edgar goosebumps as he dried his hands. He felt like no more of a guest that Eric Osborne would, and that pleased him. This vacation was off to a great start. He already felt like a member of the family. Edgar pulled back the robin's egg shower curtain and examined the items on the shelf within. There were a few varieties of body wash, mostly fruit or floral scents, and one in the shape of the Batman mask, and two types of shampoo, but only one conditioner. Edgar lifted each bottle to his nose and closed his eyes, letting the scent form in his mind the image of Kimmy and Jason. The last one, a Strawberry Fields body wash, he rose to his lips. Like the rose, it was incredibly bitter, but he enjoyed it regardless. This was just another sensation he would use to expand his knowledge and awareness of the Osborne family. Leaving the bathroom, he walked down the hall and turned the corner. On the left side of this hallway were 3 bedrooms belonging to Kimmy, Jason, and Chris respectively, and on the right was the master bedroom. The closest was Kimmy's room, so Edgar started there. The walls were painted soft white to match the rest of the house, but were adorned with posters and collages of photos of Kimmy and her friends. Edgar disliked photographs. The concept of photography seemed one-dimensional, and Edgar thrived on his trans-dimensional life. There was potential for the art to blossom, and it sometimes did when Edgar was behind the lens, an activity he would do occasionally on vacation, but the masses would never accept it fully. People want to remember happiness, so smiling photographs are the only ones ever taken. Life, Edgar knew, was rarely filled with genuine smiles, so it was pointless to pretend otherwise. He preferred capturing moments of fear, anger, and sadness. It was only with these that the true emotional capacity of a man's life could be explored, and the art form could reach true transcendence. He entered the room and searched the cluttered floor until he found what he was looking for, which had been tossed in the corner beneath a pair of blue jeans. Bending over, Edgar picked up a black blouse that he'd seen Kimmy wearing the day before and buried his face in it. It smelled of strawberry fields and faintly of sweat. He took in several deep breaths before folding the blouse with care, and then set it on the floor just outside the room. Inside the bedroom once more, Edgar stepped over piles of dirty laundry as he approached Kimmy's bed. Unlike the rest of the room, Kimmy's bed reflected a clean, orderly personality. This was the beginning of Kimmy growing up, Edgar thought, her transformation from a disorderly teenager to a mature adult. The cream-colored comforter was pulled tight across the mattress. Her pillow sat directly in the middle of the top of the bed, and next to it, a stuffed teddy bear holding a heart embroidered with 2016 in white thread watched Edgar through glass eyes. Edgar pulled the comforter loose and slid his body beneath it. He grabbed the bear and tucked it between the crook of his elbow and his ribs like a child sleeping with his favorite toy. He turned to lay on his left side, smelling the scent of conditioner on her pillow, and looked around the room. Kimmy was a dedicated side sleeper, and as Edgar lay there, he imagined the things that may cross the teenager's mind as she drifted off to sleep. Would she think about Toby, her Thursday night star-crossed lover? Probably. Few girls her age spend sleepless nights thinking of other things. But maybe she did think of other things too. Maybe she thought of being a photographer like she told her friends and teachers she aspired to be. Edgar doubted it, but maybe she thought about what she'd really do with her career, outside of childish fantasies. Photography for teenaged girls was equivalent to boys aspiring to be college football players. Many talked about it, few pursued it, and less achieved it, leaving it to become a passing hobby, if not forgotten completely. Edgar believed her calling was that of a teacher of handicapped children. She had a class in which she learned how to work with children, and in that class, Edgar believed he could see a look in her eye like that of a fledgling learning to fly. Kimmy probably didn't know it, but Edgar did in that class. She was learning to do exactly what she was meant to do. He lay in Kimmy's bed for several minutes, pondering these things and looking out at the first things the girl saw in the morning and the last thing she saw at night. It was a place in her life that played an unacknowledged, yet important role. It was a private moment that she now shared with Edgar. He saw the picture on her nightstand and the alarm clock next to it. He saw the closet, open and bearing all the possible outfits to wear that day. He saw how messy the bedroom was and thought that she really ought to clean it. Then, just as he knew Kimmy would, he shrugged off the thought and told himself she'd clean it later. There was never a set length of time Edgar spent doing these things. For some of his vacations, seconds were spent in the beds of his gracious hosts, and in others he would spend accumulative hours there, coming back to the bedroom several times over the course of his stay there. He usually waited until he felt a particular satiation inside him, like being full after a large meal. In the case of Kimmy Osborne, it took about 15 minutes for him to feel satisfied, although as he smoothed over the comforter once more, Edgar wondered if he might go back for seconds later. Leaving Kimmy's room, Edgar entered Jason's next, ignoring the family pictures that covered the wall across from the two doors. Unlike his sister's bedroom, Jason's room was somewhat orderly, save from a small handful of action figures on the floor that looked like they'd been stopped in the middle of an epic battle. Edgar stooped down and picked up one of the soldiers from his battle with Optimus Prime. It was a long-haired barbarian that reminded Edgar of He-Man, except this figure had a robotic arm. Jason played with this one frequently, but it wasn't his favorite. Edgar would have loved to take the Obi-Wan figurine that Jason rarely left home without except for when he went to school, but he couldn't risk a house-wide search lest the Osborn family find their new house guest before he was ready. So instead, he pocketed the barbarian whose absence would be far less noticeable. When he tucked himself into Jason's bed, he had to bend his knees awkwardly to fit between the sheets. With a height of just over 6 feet, Edgar was too tall to fit into an 8-year-old's twin-sized bed. At that age, Jason had not yet found a position in which to pattern his sleep for Edgar to copy, so he was pleased to find a comfortable position lying on his back. He thought about the young boy just as he'd thought about Kimmy, but didn't spend as much time doing so. Jason was pure and uncorrupt, immature and flat. The deepest his thoughts probably went were wondering about what heaven is like, or exactly how babies get into girls' stomachs. Edgar spent a few moments following the mindset of a child, but it was short-lived. If he wanted to be more childlike, he'd vacation in the homes of more children. He wouldn't pass up the opportunity if it presented itself like in the case of Jason Osborn, but Edgar preferred to be the monster in the closet of more deserving people. Making sure to leave the bed just as he found it, Edgar left the room. He placed the toy just outside the door in the hallway, just as he left the blouse, and moved toward the bedroom of Eric and Hannah. On the wall to the far left, next to the side of the bed Eric slept on, was the door to the master bathroom. Edgar decided to start there and work his way forward.
That's not the end of the story. If you have hooked up till here, then hit like button and comment down what do you think will happen next. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, then do support me by subscribing so you may not miss any video in future.